The lighthouse at Driftwood Point. Each morning at Driftwood Point begins the same. The sky fades from navy to pearl, and the sea hums beneath it, quiet and endless. I rise with the sun, not because I must, but because the light feels like an old friend knocking gently on the window. The lighthouse stands at the edge of a long, winding cliff, its stones warmed by salt and time. There's no road, just a narrow path that curls through tall grass and wind-worn trees. Beyond it, the sea stretches in all directions, still and full of memory. Inside, the rooms are spare wooden floorboards, a worn armchair, a kettle that knows exactly how long to sing. There's comfort in the repetition, in knowing that today will unfold slowly, like every day before. The light, the sea, and me. I begin by climbing the spiral staircase, steps echoing softly beneath my boots. At the top, the lantern room waits, glass windows misted with salt. I wipe them clean with a cloth worn thin, revealing the horizon piece by piece. The lens, a gentle giant of glass and brass, rests at the heart of the room. I check its oil, polish the frame, and whisper good morning, though it doesn't reply. Still, it listens. Everything out here listens. The sea, the sky, the light itself. The view from the top is always the same, yet never boring. This morning, the sea is come barely a ripple, like a pane of blue glass. A few gulls circle lazily in the breeze. Far off, a fishing boat moves slowly, its wake stretching like a ribbon behind it. I take a moment to breathe it all in. Salt air, the creak of the railing beneath my hand, the wind threading through my coat. I don't speak aloud, but I do think in phrases like little letters I never send, words that float quietly, meant only for me. Downstairs, I light the stove and boil water for tea. The tin clinks as I scoop the leaves chamomile today. I place the cup on the windowsill and sit beside it, the steam rising in soft curls. The lighthouse hums in its bones, old and kind. My journal sits open on the desk, a leather-bound book filled with small thoughts. I write a single line each morning. Nothing fancy, just what I saw, what I felt, sky pale and full of breath, sea like glass, lantern warm. It's enough. Some days I reread old entries. The ink fades a little with time, but the words still feel true. They remind me that the days are not the same, even if they seem to echo. Each has its own softness, its own way of wrapping itself around me. After tea, I step outside onto the narrow balcony that circles the tower. The railing is cool beneath my fingers, slightly damp with sea mist. Below, the waves press softly against the rocks, a slow, steady rhythm that never asks for attention. From up here, the land seems far away. Just the sweep of grass behind the tower, and beyond that, a thin ribbon of trees. No roads, no houses. Just the wind, the birds, and the quiet breathing of the tide. It's a loneliness that feels full. I walk the perimeter, boots thudding gently against the wood. Every creak, every groan in the beams feels familiar, like the lighthouse itself is stretching in the morning air, remembering its shape. It's old, but still proud, still standing. Downstairs again, I tend to small things. I check the hinges on the door, sweep the stairs, oil the lantern gears. Tasks passed down from one keeper to the next. I don't know all their names, but I feel them here. This is a place built on care. By midday, the sky is high and white, clouds drifting slow like ships. I sit by the window with bread and a sliver of cheese, listening to the wind tap softly at the glass. No need for music, the sea sings enough. Always the same song, always new. I take my lunch slowly, no rush. There's no one to meet, no clock to beat. The kettle hisses now and then, reminding me it's ready for a second cup. I pour without thinking, the way you do with habits that feel like home. The cup warms my hands. The birds come in the afternoon gulls, mostly some terns. They wheel and dive along the cliffside, their calls sharp but not unpleasant. One lands on the railing near my window and stays there a while, blinking at me like an old friend passing through. I talk to the birds sometimes, just small things. Nice day today, or that wind's stronger than it looks. They don't answer, but I feel heard all the same. Out here, even silence listens. Even the waves seem to nod when you speak to them. Once, I named one of the gulls Charlie. He came 3 days in a row, perched in the same spot. I started saving crusts for him. Haven't seen him in a while now, but I still leave crumbs out, just in case. Some habits are hard to break. The afternoon sun casts long shadows on the spiral stairs. I sweep them again anyway, even if they're not dusty. The motion feels right. Circular, like the lens above, like the tides. Everything here moves in quiet loops, and I move with it. Sometimes I reread the old manual left behind by the last keeper. The pages are brittle and stained, but his notes are still clear. Check the gears weekly. Always clean the glass after a storm. In the margins, he wrote little thoughts, quiet ones. One note reads, "Don't forget to watch the sunset." Underneath it, a date from years ago. I've never missed a sunset since. Not one. Even if clouds cover the sky, I stand at the western window and wait. Just to be there. Just to keep the tradition. Today, the sun dips low over calm water, casting a golden path across the sea. The reflection shifts with the waves broken, then whole, then broken again. I rest my arms on the window ledge and watch. It never feels old, this ritual of light. The sky turns pink at the edges, then lavender. Shadows stretch long across the tower floor. Inside, everything glows, softly brass, wood, glass, even the walls. The lighthouse holds the color like it knows it's borrowed and brief. I light the lantern just before the last of the sun slips away. The flame flares quietly, then settles into a steady, gentle glow. The lens begins its turn, slow and smooth, casting light out across the darkening sea. A signal, a promise, a rhythm. With the lantern lit, I climb back down the winding stairs, hand trailing along the cool stone wall. The tower hums now, faint and low, like it's speaking to the sea. I listen without trying. The quiet out here has layers, and I've learned to hear them all. Night falls gently at Driftwood Point. No harsh edges, just a slow dimming, like someone turning down a lamp. Stars blink on above the horizon, one at a time. I sit by the window with a blanket and a book, but often I just look out, doing nothing. In the distance, a ship's light flickers tiny, moving steady across the waves. I wonder where it's headed, what's being carried, who's on board, asleep or watching. I don't need the answers. It's enough to know they're out there, passing by. The lighthouse was built to guide others, but it also guards me. Its walls keep the wind at bay. Its light gives the night shape. I've been here so long, I forget what silence without the sea sounds like. I think I'd miss the waves if they ever stopped. Before bed, I make one final round, check the door, the fire, the windows, then I climb once more to the top, look out at the sea, and nod toward the light. A quiet ritual, the kind that says, all is well. And it is. It truly is. In my room, the sheets smell faintly of salt and sun-dried linen. The mattress creaks as I settle in, blanket pulled up to my chest. The walls murmur with the sound of the sea outside, gentle and steady. I close my eyes, listening to the waves roll in. Sleep comes slowly, like the tide. First my breath softens, then my thoughts. I drift between memory and dream echoes of storms, bright mornings and quiet evenings, just like this. The lighthouse keeps watch. I'm not alone. I never feel alone here. Sometimes I dream of walking the shoreline in the dark, the beam of the lighthouse sweeping over me in slow circles. In the dream, I don't need direction. I just follow the rhythm of the waves, one foot after another, the sand cool and familiar. Tonight, the wind is gentle. It hums through the cracks like a lullaby, brushing the curtains, rustling the pages of my journal. I leave the window cracked open, just a little. The sea breathes in and out, and I breathe with it, sinking deeper. I keep a small lantern by my bedside, just in case, but I rarely light it. The glow from the tower filters softly through the window, enough to see the edges of the room. It makes the night feel safe, wrapped in gold, like the darkness is being held. The lighthouse turns steadily through the night, casting long, slow arcs of light across the sea. I picture it even as I sleep, rotating without pause, the beam sweeping wide and quiet, touching distant waves, reaching ships I'll never see. Sometimes I imagine the light as a thread, stitching the sea to the stars, holding everything together while the world rests. It's not a loud kind of strength, but a quiet, one patient, enduring. The way the tide always returns, no matter how far it goes. The night deepens, and the world grows still. Even the birds have gone quiet. Only the sea keeps speaking in soft phrases and quiet murmurs, brushing the rocks, sighing through the cliffs. I turn in my sleep, and the lighthouse keeps its rhythm. Dreams come like slow waves. I walk familiar paths down winding steps, across the grass, along the edge of the cliffs. Always gentle, always slow. Sometimes I see the other keepers in my dreams. We nod at each other, no words needed, just knowing. Outside, the stars shift across the sky, and the moon sends a silver path over the water. The beam of the lighthouse crosses it again and again. It's a dance light over light, movement over stillness, and somewhere beneath it all I sleep. A soft breeze sneaks through the window, carrying the scent of salt and distant rain. I shift beneath the blanket, half aware, half asleep. The lighthouse turns above, steady as breath. Its glow washes over the room in slow, golden pulses. I dream I'm floating, not in water, but in light, buoyed by silence, drifting just above the waves. The beam of the lighthouse shines beneath me, not guiding, but cradling, like the arms of the sea itself. I feel weightless, timeless, calm. The storm will come tomorrow, can feel it in the air even now, but it doesn't trouble my sleep. I've weathered many storms here. They come, they pass. The walls are thick, the windows strong, and the light always keeps turning. In my sleep, I hear a gull cry once, distant and clear. The sound reaches through the dream, anchoring me to the present. The sea murmurs below, a soft lullaby, rising and falling like breath. Everything here breathes together. Sea wind, light, me. And still the light turns. A single golden sweep against the sky. It's a promise kept, hour after hour. Never tiring, the sea rolls on beneath it, endless and unhurried. In this place, even time moves gently, and I sleep carried by the rhythm. The air grows cooler near dawn. A faint silver begins to edge the window, the kind of light that doesn't wake you but invites you gently back. I stir beneath the blanket but stay still, eyes closed, letting the hush of morning hold me a little longer. The lantern above is still turning. I can hear its quiet rhythm, soft whir like breath. It never stops, not even when the sky begins to brighten. That's the way of lighthouses. They shine until they're no longer needed, then wait without complaint. I rise slowly, the floorboards cool beneath my feet. I move without words, without sound. The kettle goes on. The same tea leaves, the same cup. Outside, the sea is still dark, but the horizon glows faintly, a promise of sun beneath the waves. I climb the stairs once more, each step familiar, each turn of the spiral like a memory repeating itself. At the top, the glass is cool with dew. I wipe it gently and look out. The stars are fading, one by one, giving the sky back to the day. The world holds its breath in that quiet hour before sunrise. No birds yet, no boats, just stillness. Just the turning of the light and the distant hush of waves meeting rock. I stand in silence, feeling the edge of night begin to loosen its hold. The sky shifts from deep blue to soft grey, then touches of pink begin to bloom above the water. It's a slow reveal, like the world pulling back a curtain. I rest my hands on the railing, feeling the sea air rise, cooler now, but kind. Below, the tide has come in, smoothing the shoreline. The rocks glisten like old coins, and sea foam gathers at the edges. There's no noise except the water and the faint creak of the tower's wooden bones settling with the coming day. I light the stove again, the flame catching with a quiet whoosh. The kettle begins its slow song. The lighthouse dims slightly as the daylight gathers strength. Its work for the night is nearly done, but it never stops. Not really. From the window, I see the first gull glide past, wings stretched wide, silent in the new light. Then another. Morning begins like this most days, a slow gathering of wing beats and wind, the sea beginning to shimmer with the sun's approach. I pour the tea, the scent grounding me. Everything about this morning is the same as yesterday, and that's what makes it beautiful. Repetition with care. The world doesn't ask me to rush. It only asks me to notice. And I do. I always do. The first rays of sunlight touch the tower, casting long, golden lines through the windows. Dust dances in the light like tiny stars. I sit near the sill, warming my hands on the teacup, watching the horizon slowly stretch and glow. Another boat appears, way out past the rocks. Just a silhouette at first, barely moving. I wonder who's a borderly fisherman, perhaps, or someone simply chasing the stillness of the sea. I raise my cup slightly, a quiet greeting from afar. The tide has pulled fully in now, covering the low stones and sweeping softly at the base of the cliff. The sound is round and full, like a deep breath being taken. The ocean never hurries. It only arrives again and again without fail. I make a note in the journal. Sunrise clear, sea calm, boat at a distance, lantern steady. I close the book and rest my hand on its cover for a moment, feeling the weight of another morning safely recorded, another day beginning with peace. Soon I'll clean the lens again, wipe down the rails, and prepare for whatever small weather comes. But for now, I stay still, letting the warmth fill the room, letting the lighthouse breathe, letting the sea remind me how to simply be. Some might say nothing happens out here, but I know better. Each cloud that drifts across the water, each gust of wind that shifts the grass, each beam of light that reaches afar off ship, it's all part of something, a quiet kind of wonder. I step outside, the wood of the deck warmed by sun. The gulls call softly now, their cries less urgent. One circles close and lands near my boot, tilting its head. I nod at it. Morning, I say, and it blinks as if to say the same in return. The sea sparkles now, full and bright, waves catching the sun like handfuls of light. I lean against the railing and close my eyes. I don't need to see it to know it's there. I can feel it in my chest, steady and deep, like a second heartbeat. A breeze rustles the grass behind the lighthouse, and the scent of salt and wildflowers rises. It smells like the edge of something, maybe time, maybe memory. I breathe it in slowly, anchoring myself in the simplicity of the moment. I turn back toward the tower, ready to begin the day's tasks. But before I step inside, I glance once more at the sea. It holds everything and asks for nothing, just to be seen, just to be known. And here, each day, I do just that. Inside, the tower feels warm, no sunlight filtered through thick glass, resting gently on stone and wood. The lantern above still spins, slower now, its light pale against the day. Still, I check it. Still, I whisper thanks before I go. I sweep the steps, polish the brass handles, fold the cloth I used to clean the glass. These small things matter here. Not for visitors, there are none, but because care itself is a form of company. Every act of attention adds to the calm. The hours stretch ahead like the tide, slow and open. Maybe I'll read. Maybe I'll mend that loose shutter on the north side. But first, I'll sit. Just sit. Let the light wash over me. Let the air carry the sea's breath through the open window. And as I sit, the lighthouse settles with me. It doesn't need applause or purpose beyond what it already is. A keeper of light, a place of stillness. I think I've become the same less, a man waiting for something more, a part of the rhythm itself. So I breathe, I listen. The waves roll in, the light keeps turning. Another day has begun at Driftwood Point, and I am here watching, resting, keeping company with the sea. And that is enough. Tides and teacups. At the edge of a sleepy seaside village, where the tide withdrew each morning like a polite guest, there stood a tiny tea shop. Its sign, hand-painted and slightly faded, read, "Tides and Teacups." The door only opened when the sand beneath it was dry. Miss Enid opened the shop just after sunrise, when the sea had pulled back and left glistening shells scattered across the shore. She wore a soft grey shawl and blue slippers that never quite matched. Her kettle was already whistling before the bell rang. Inside, the tea room smelled of orange peel, lavender, and stories long since told. Wooden tables stood near lace-curtained windows, and every teacup was mismatched, as if the ocean had delivered each one from a different, gentler world. Miss Enid lit 3 small candles and placed them in the windowsill. For the sea, the sky, and the tide, she whispered as she always did. She believed the ocean listened, and that it left little gift sea glass, driftwood, smooth round stones. The first customer was always Mr. Paddock, a fisherman with silver hair and a coat that smelled like salt. He never said much, just nodded and pointed to the same cup each time. Enid poured his tea without asking, and added a curl of lemon peel on top. Mr. Paddock sat by the window, sipping quietly while watching the sea reclaim the morning light. He never brought a book or newspaper, just watched. Enid liked that about him. Some people knew how to sit without filling the silence. Enid moved through the shop with the same grace as the tides, soft, unhurried, precise. She refilled the honey pot, arranged the lavender scones just so, and wiped the edges of each saucer as if every guest deserved a moment of care. The village knew her as the Tide Lady. Children whispered stories about her walking the shore at midnight, or speaking with gulls. Enid didn't mind. She thought some magic belonged in the world, even if it only came in teaspoons and steam. After Mr. Paddock left, Enid placed a shell on his empty table, a soft pink one shaped like a spiral. No one asked why she did it, but many noticed. Each guest left with a cup of tea and something quiet tucked into their day, something small and kind. Around mid-morning, the sun rose high enough to sparkle on the teapots lined across the shelf. Enid polished them with a cloth worn thin from years of use. She hummed softly, an old tune with no name, as the scent of chamomile filled the room. Outside, the waves lapped at the edge of the tide line, never in a rush. Enid stepped out briefly, holding a wicker basket. She scanned the sand, bending slowly to collect sea glass, smooth stones, and the occasional feather that caught her eye. She believed the sea brought her these gifts, on purpose, little thank yous for keeping her kettle hot and her windows clean. Each item she picked up found a place in the tea room, resting in bowls, jars, or tucked inside potted herbs on the sill. Back inside, she arranged the sea glass by color greens, blues. The rare lilac hand sprinkled a few into the water of a mint plant. She said the sea liked to be part of the roots. Guests didn't ask, but they often found themselves smiling anyway. A soft bell rang as the door opened again. This time it was Mara, the young woman who painted postcards of the coast. She always chose the seat in the corner, where morning light filtered through lace and danced across her sketchbook. Enid brought her jasmine tea without asking. Mara always said the scent helped her draw waves better. "Your waves never break too hard," Enid once said, looking over her shoulder. "That's because they're not angry," Mara replied, smiling. By late morning, the little tea shop was filled with gentle, sounds-clinking cups, pages turning, soft laughter. No one ever spoke too loudly. It was as if the sea had taught them how to speak softly, how to listen without needing to reply. Enid moved between the tables with quiet ease. She remembered everyone's favorites, from rosehip to ruibos, and never needed to write anything down. It wasn't memory, it was attention, and Enid gave hers freely, like sugar in a jar. The tide would begin to return by early afternoon. Enid knew it not by clock, but by scent the way the air grew heavier, the salt more present, like the sea breathing in again after a long exhale. She always noticed before anyone else. She refilled the kettle one last time and placed a fresh plate of buttered oatcakes near the register. They were warm, soft, and just slightly sweet-made with her grandmother's recipe and a touch of sea salt, always sprinkled by hand. A boy wandered in holding a toy sailboat, his mother just behind. Enid knelt to greet him. Ity offered him a seashell instead of a menu. "Choose one," she said. "It'll tell me what tea you need." He picked a pale blue one without hesitation. Enid studied the shell as if it held a secret. "Peppermint with a touch of fennel," she whispered, and the boy's eyes lit up. His mother smiled, mouthing a silent thank you. Enid simply nodded and moved to the kettle, her shawl swaying behind her. She poured the tea carefully into a cup with tiny stars along the rim. "This one's for explorers," she said, placing it before the boy. He cupped it with both hands, steam curling toward his nose, his toy sailboat forgotten on the table. Outside, the tide crept closer, lapping against the posts that held the shop above the sand. The sun hung low now, casting long shadows across the floorboards. Enid began quietly stacking empty plates, her fingers light and practiced. She never rushed the last hour. That time belonged to the sea. It was when the light grew golden and the world held its breath. Enid believed every day should have a moment where nothing moved to fast wear. Time softened just a little. The guests noticed it too. Conversations slowed. Pages were left unturned. Mara set down her brush and simply watched the tide come in. No one asked for the time. They all seemed to know, without words, that the tea room would close soon. Enid began her closing ritual with care. She snuffed the 3 candles in the window one by one, for the sea, the sky, and the tide. She whispered again, her voice softer now. The room felt like it was exhaling with her. She returned each teacup to its shelf, never in the same place. That way, they had to find their way home differently each time. Enid believed even cups liked a bit of adventure, especially ones that had held warmth and stories. The boy with the sailboat left with a smooth green stone in his pocket. Mara tucked a shell into her sketchbook. Mr. Paddock, long gone, would later find a star-shaped pebble wrapped inside his coat. No one ever asked why. They just smiled. With the last guest gone, Enid locked the door. The tide was close now, almost under the steps. Soon the sea would touch the shop's foundation again, cradling it until morning. She stood for a moment, watching the waves reclaim the shore. She lit a final lantern near the counter, casting a warm circle of light. The rest of the shop faded into shadows, teapots and jars glowing faintly like quiet memories. Enid made one last cup of tea lavender, and lemonade sat by the window to sip. Outside, the waves pressed gently against the shop's stilts, their rhythm steady and slow. Enid listened as she sipped, her fingers wrapped round the warm cup. The sea was her oldest guest, never speaking, but always arriving. She closed her eyes and let the breeze slip through the slightly cracked window. It smelled of salt and faraway rain. Somewhere out in the dark, a bell buoy rang, its low chime folding into the hush of water and wood. Enid thought about the stories told today, not dramatic ones, just quiet moments shared between sips, a lost button found, a letter reread, a smile passed between strangers. These were the stories that mattered most, the kind that settled in slowly. The lantern flickered once, then steadied. Enid took it as a sign time for sleep. She rinsed her cup, wiped the counter one last time, and tucked the sea glass into their bowls like tiny dreams resting for the night. She climbed the narrow stairs to the room above the shop. It was small, just a bed, a trunk, and a patchwork quilt stitched with waves. The floor creaked softly as she moved. Even the house seemed to whisper goodnight with every step. She changed into a cotton nightdress and pulled the quilt up to her chest. Outside, the tide rose higher, swaying beneath the floorboards. The gentle creak of wood meeting water was a lullaby she'd known since girlhood. Beside her bed sat a small wooden box. She opened it carefully and removed a smooth, flat stone etched with a spiral. She held it in both hands, eyes closed. It wasn't magic, not really, but it carried something quiet, something old. Each night she made one wish, not for herself, but for someone who had passed through her door. Sometimes she chose a name, other times just a memory, a smile, a thank you, a child's laughter. She whispered it into the stone like a secret. The wind shifted, brushing against the shutters. Enid pulled the quilt tighter and listened. Rain would come by morning. She could feel it in her knees. Still, she smiled. The tea room always felt warmer on rainy days, cozier, quieter. Sleep came gently, like the tide creeping over the sand. Her breaths slowed, matched to the hush beneath the floor. And all through the night, the sea stayed near, watching the little shop, rocking it softly like something it loved. The morning came, wrapped in fog. Grey light filtered through the lace curtains as Enid stirred beneath her quilt. The sea was still high, brushing the steps with soft, foamy sighs. She didn't rise yet. There was no need to hurry. She listened to the water move beneath her floorboards, a sound like breathing. The tide would go out soon, revealing the sandpath once more. Until then, she stayed tucked in, warm and still, the world outside held in pause. When the water finally receded, she rose slowly and wrapped herself in a wool shawl. Downstairs, she opened the window just a crack, letting in the salt-laced breeze. It carried the scent of kelp, driftwood, and rain not far behind. The candles were lit again, in the same order as always, for the sea, the sky, and the tide. She whispered the words gently, her hands steady. Ritual mattered here. The shop listened. The sea listened. That was enough. She set the kettle on its old iron belly, already humming with anticipation. Today's blend would be nettle and lemon balm, perfect for foggy mornings. She moved with the same rhythm as the day before, and yet everything felt new again. By the time Mr. Paddock arrived, the fog had lifted slightly, turning the shop into a glowing bubble of warmth. He nodded once, as always, and Enid poured his tea. This time she added a sprig of rosemary heed. Been coughing yesterday. Mara followed soon after, sketchbook in hand, boots damp with morning dew. She chose a different table today, closer to the window, where the fog still clung to the glass-like memory. Enid brought her rose tea without a word. There was a hush in the tea room that morning, not silence, just softness. Chairs scraped gently. Spoons clinked against porcelain. No one spoke loudly. It felt like the sea had woven a quiet spell over the place, and no one dared break it. Enid sat for a moment herself, teacup warming her hands. She rarely did, but this morning invited pause. She looked out at the retreating tide, tiny pools left behind in the sand. She saw her reflection in the tea, rippling gently. Rain began as a whisper against the roof, barely there at first. Enid smiled, setting her cup down and rising. She fetched a fresh loaf of oat bread from the oven and sliced it slowly, placing each piece on a warm plate near the window. She drizzled a bit of honey across the bread, watching it melt into the soft surface. The smell filled the tea room, comforting, familiar. Guests leaned in a little closer to their plates, savoring the moment. No one rushed, no one needed to. The windows blurred with rain, turning the view outside into watercolor waves. Sky and sand blending into one soft, moving canvas. Mara smiled and began sketching with slower lines, her pencil gliding in time with the falling drops. Mr. Paddock coughed once, then took a sip of his rosemary tea. He glanced at Enid and tipped his cup slightly in thanks. She nodded, already turning back to the counter to prepare the next pot. Everything had a rhythm here. A little girl pressed her nose to the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. "It's like the sky is crying," she whispered. Enid smiled and handed her a cinnamon biscuit shaped like a star. "Maybe it's just washing things clean," she said. Outside, the tide began to rise again, slowly creeping toward the edge of the shop. Enid glanced out and felt the shift, not with worry, but with recognition. The sea was simply keeping time, its version of a clock, patient and eternal. Enid refilled the kettle and tidied the shelves, her hands moving slowly, reverently. Every object had its place: jars of dried herbs, little tins of rare blends, seashells resting beside labels written in careful script. The tea room glowed softly, despite the grey skies. It was the kind of light that made things feel softer skin, thoughts, memories. Guests leaned into the quiet like a blanket. Even the rain seemed to hush itself out of respect. As the water rose higher along the stilts, Enid lit the lanterns early. Their warm light flickered against the fogged windows, casting soft gold across the floorboards. It felt like dusk, even though the sun was still behind the clouds. She moved through the room, gently collecting empty cups and placing small trinkets where they had rested. A piece of coral here, a pale stone there. She never said why she did it, but each token matched its guest in some unseen way. The bell above the door jingled one last time as the final guest slipped out, umbrella in hand. Enid stood for a moment, watching the trail of footprints in the damp sand. The tide would sweep them away soon, as it always did. Enid locked the door gently, her fingers resting for a moment on the brass handle. Behind her, the tea room exhaled into stillness. The tide had nearly reached the steps. The sea, like an old friend, had come to cradle the day's end. She dimmed the lanterns, one by one, until only the small one near her kettle remained. Its glow flickered across the jars of tea, the empty chairs, the rain-speckled windows. The hush in the room was soft, like the pause before a lullaby. She brewed one last cup rosemary, and Vanilland sat in her usual chair. The sea pressed gently beneath her, rocking the floorboards with slow, careful rhythm. She took a sip, then closed her eyes, letting the warmth settle deep. In the quiet, she could hear it all: the sea's breath, the creak of wood, the faint memory of voices. Every sound folded into the next, as though the shop itself was dreaming. She sat still, not thinking, only feeling the weight of calm. The tide reached its peak and paused, as if to listen. Enid rose, finished her tea, and blew out the final light. Upstairs, she slipped beneath the patchwork quilt once more. The hush of water below, like a song only she remembered. Rain tapped gently at the windows as Enid drifted to sleep. Downstairs, the tea room rested in shadows, the shelves silent, the sea glass glinting faintly when lightning flickered far off over the waves. The tide whispered below. Her dreams came quietly, memories folded into fog, waves, and candlelight. She walked the low tide in her sleep, gathering shells that glowed with warmth, placing them into cups without ever spilling a drop. Everything moved slowly. Outside, the sea began to pull back once more, its work done. The rain eased into mist, and the wind grew still. The shop rocked gently on its posts, steady and unbothered. It had always known how to wait for the day to begin again. In the hours before dawn, the candles in the windows would be lit again. Tea leaves would steep, and the tide would retreat just enough. Footsteps would return. But for now, the tea room slept. The world held its breath and dreamed. And in that dreaming, the sea watched over tides and teacups, carrying the day's stories far and wide. Enid, the tide lady, slept soundly above, wrapped in salt air, sea glass, and silence, until morning called once more with steam and kindness. Beneath the coral sky, the ocean greeted me like a held breath, cool, endless, blue. I slipped beneath the surface, my body weightless, carried by the hush. Above, the sun fractured into ribbons of light. Below, the sea opened wide, ready to be listened to. Each kick of my fins sent gentle ripples through the water. There was no rush here, only slow motion. Fish scattered, then returned, curious and unafraid. The coral below shimmered in colors no painter could name. My breath echoed in my ears, steady, rhythmic. Soft inhale. Pause, exhale. The bubbles floated upward, drifting like thoughts I no longer needed. Down here, I didn't have to speak or decide. I only had to move slowly and see clearly. A school of silver fish passed in perfect silence, their bodies catching the light like scattered coins. I floated still, letting them surround me. They moved as one, then vanished into the blue like a thought forgotten mid-sentence. I reached the reef. It rose beneath me like a city built by time towers of coral, tunnels of light, gardens of motion. Every inch of it was alive, shifting gently in the tide. I hovered there, letting the world unfold around me. Soft coral waved like fields of grass, swaying with each passing current. Small fish darted in and out of their folds, blue, yellow, even translucent, like living glass. I drifted closer, careful not to touch, just watching, just floating. A sea turtle passed overhead, slow and sure, its flippers graceful as wings. I turned slowly to follow its path, letting myself be pulled by its rhythm. It paid me no mind. I was just another shape in the water, welcome but unnoticed. Below, a patch of anemones pulsed gently, their tentacles glowing under the filtered light. Tiny clownfish hovered within, moving in delicate patterns, never straying far from the softness. Their world was measured in inches, not miles. I descended farther, the colors dimming into deeper blues and greens. The reef changed hairless light, but more stillness. The shapes grew stranger, the silence thicker. It felt like entering a dream, soft-edged and slow. At a bend in the reef, I found a ledge where I could rest. I folded my legs and let myself settle on the sandy bottom. The sea held me gently. Above, the surface was gone. Around me, time moved in slow spirals, untouched by urgency. Tiny bubbles escaped from the reef, rising slowly past my mask. I watched them drift upward, catching slivers of sunlight as they went. Each one felt like a quiet thought let go, floating toward the surface where worries waited. A pair of angelfish glided by, their fins trailing like silk. I didn't move. The sea taught me patience rewarded stillness with beauty. Down here, motion was measured, every movement a whisper, not a shout. My fingers brushed the sand, and a stingray stirred, lifting gently from its hiding place. Its body flowed like fabric, its eyes calm and curious. I watched it disappear into the blue, its path as smooth as a lullaby. Beyond the reef, shadows hinted at deeper places. I kicked softly, slow strokes guiding me past coral towers into a cavern lit by shafts of light. It was cool and quiet, the silence almost sacred. I slowed my breathing even more. Inside the cavern, a sea fan stretched like lace across the opening. Tiny shrimp clung to it. Nearly invisible, I floated near, watching their quiet world unfold. No rush, no sound, just the gentle sway of water and the rhythm of life. The cavern narrowed slightly, but the light still reached through in soft beams, catching dust-like plankton in its glow. It felt like drifting through a slow snowfall, each particle turning gently in the quiet blue. A small octopus peeked out from behind a rock, one eye blinking curiously. Its skin changed color as it studied me soft pink, then blue, then pale as sand. I remained still, and after a moment it slid from its hiding place and moved on. The current shifted, brushing against my arms and legs like a slow breath. I let it guide me back out of the cavern, where the coral waited, glowing faintly under the mid-morning sun filtering down in golden streaks. Back in open water, the sea opened wide again. I turned slowly in place, taking it all in the reef. The fish, the endless blue. There was no horizon here, only color and motion. I felt small, but not lost, part of something larger. I swam along a ridge where the reef dropped off into deeper water. The edge was sharp, but beautiful home, two long trailing sea grasses and bright purple coral that looked like fire frozen mid-dance. The deep hummed beneath me. A gentle slope led me downward, where the light dimmed and the colors grew cooler. Here the sea whispered in a lower voice, not unfriendly, just older. I followed its pull, slow and calm, like drifting through the pages of a dream. A jellyfish floated past, pulsing with quiet grace. Its body shimmered in pinks and blues, long tendrils trailing behind like ribbons in a breeze. I kept my distance, admiring its slow, hypnotic dance in the open water. The deeper I went, the more the ocean felt like memory soft, echoing, endless. I passed a broken anchor half buried in sand, its chain curled like a sleeping serpent. Around it, coral had begun to grow, reclaiming the metal in silence. I drifted past a sunken beam part of an old boat. Maybe fish moved through its shadow, weaving in and out like thread. The ocean took what it was given, turning forgotten things into part of its rhythm, into quiet beauty. I paused to rest near a bed of seagrass, where small creatures darted and disappeared. A seahorse clung to a blade, its body swaying with the current. It didn't flee, just floated there beside me, as if we were both part of the same pause. The water here was cooler, the blue deeper. Shadows stretched longer across the sand, and sounds from the surface no longer reached me. It felt like the world had narrowed to breath, movement, and the slow dance of the sea. I swam slowly along a ridge of coral shaped like an open hand. Inside its palm, fish gathered striped, spotted, glowing faintly. They darted and circled, a gentle storm of color held in stillness. I hovered nearby, watching, weightless. A distant whale call echoed through the deep glow, long and filled with meaning I couldn't grasp. It moved through my chest like a slow drumbeat. Everything paused, as if the ocean itself had stopped to listen. In a small cave nearby, soft blue light filtered in through a hole in the ceiling. Tiny shrimp floated in the column of light like falling stars. I entered slowly, careful not to disturb the stillness. It felt like a sacred place. I sat on the sandy floor, legs crossed, arms at rest. Around me, the reef pulsed gently, alive but calm. I could have stayed there forever, suspended in that silent chapel of coral and water. My breath slowed, even my thoughts quieted. The longer I sat, the more I noticed tiny movements in the sand, soft flickers of light on the cave wall. The way the current shifted every few moments, like the sea adjusting its position, making room for me in its vast stillness. A crab emerged nearby, its legs clicking softly as it moved sideways across the sand. It paused, antennae twitching, then disappeared behind a rock. Everything down here moved with purpose, yet none of it felt rushed. I felt a gentle tug at my awareness, the sense that time was passing. Not urgently, just enough to notice. I rose slowly from the sandy floor, giving one last glance to the glowing shrimp, still drifting like dream flakes in the light. As I swam out of the cave, the water warmed slightly and the light grew richer. The coral colors returned orange fans, deep green tubes, soft pink bulbs. It was like re-entering a slow sunrise, unfolding one color at a time. A dolphin appeared in the distance, then another. They swam in wide loops, their motions playful but unhurried. I didn't approach, I just watched, arms still, heart open. Even their joy was quiet here, wrapped in the hush of the sea. The dolphins vanished into the blue, their shapes dissolving like shadows in mist. I floated in their wake, the water still warm where they'd passed. A few tiny bubbles rose past me, silent and slow, catching the light as they drifted upward. I swam along a reef wall, its surface covered in life. Starfish clung to crevices. Sea slugs crept with velvet grace. Every inch was alive, but none of it called for attention. It just existed, beautiful, quiet enough. The sun above sent soft rays filtering through golden trails that danced along the coral. I reached out gently, letting one of the beams fall across my glove. It felt like touching light, like holding time in the palm of my hand. I found a quiet slope of sand and settled again, my body gently swaying with the water. In the distance, a school of fish twisted through the open blue, their movement a single thought. I watched, steady and still, part of the moment. Down here, the world didn't ask for anything. It just offered itself, soundless, weightless, timeless. I let go of my thoughts like small pebbles, dropping them gently into the sand. The sea received them without a word. I drifted along a path of scattered shells, each one smoothed by time and tide. Some were cracked, others whole, but all were beautiful. The sea had shaped them with patience, turning loss into form, silence into art. A gentle current curled around me, carrying warmth from the surface. I floated with it, arms at my sides, eyes open to the shimmer above. The light danced across my mask, gold rippling like wind through tall grass. A single lionfish hovered near the rocks, its fins slow and deliberate. Dangerous, yes, but it moved with elegance, like fire slowed down. I admired it from a distance, knowing even the sharpest things could still be beautiful. As I turned a corner of the reef, I found a garden of soft corals, purple peach, and pale green. They pulsed gently with the tide, breathing with the ocean. I floated above them, still as a shadow, letting the moment stretch. Time blurred. I could no longer tell how long I'd been drifting. There was no need to know. Down here, the hours folded softly into one another like waves, each one carrying me further into peace, into presence, into stillness. I passed a cluster of sea sponges, their surfaces bright and porous, like sculptures shaped by breath. Tiny fish darted between them, vanishing and reappearing like flickers of thought. The reef was alive in ways I couldn't name, only feel. Beneath an overhang, I spotted a moray eel, its head barely visible. Its eyes met mine for a moment, calm, alert, not afraid. I nodded slightly, as if to say, "I see you." It blinked slowly, then returned to stillness, part of the rock once more. The sand below shimmered with faint trails marks left by crabs, rays, or the sea itself. I followed them with my eyes, tracing their gentle curves like sentences written in a language only the ocean could speak. Above, the surface glittered with distant suns. I began my slow ascent, not with urgency, but with care. The water lightened gradually. Each upward motion felt like a goodbye whispered softly, not a door closing, but a chapter ending. The reef faded beneath me, but its presence lingered in my chest. I rose through layers of blue, the sounds of my breath returning like waves lapping at shore. I didn't leave the sea behind. I carried it with my quiet, steady, alive. Near the surface, the sunlight grew stronger, breaking the water into golden webs. I floated just beneath it, watching the light shift with each ripple. It felt like drifting beneath a stained glass sky, warm and endless. A single silver fish glided past, its scales catching every ray. For a moment, it looked like a star swimming through daylight. I followed it with my eyes until it vanished into the brightness, leaving only the shimmer behind. I surfaced slowly, my face breaking through into warm air and soft breeze. The world above greeted me, gently, no noise, just the hush of small waves and the rustle of water slipping off my gear. I floated on my back, staring up at the sky. Clouds drifted lazily overhead, just like the fish below. I felt suspended between two vast worlds, one above, one below, holding its own kind of calm. The taste of salt lingered on my lips. My body felt light, my mind even lighter. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the sun warm my skin. The reef, the coral, the quiet, they were still with me, just beneath the surface. I began to swim slowly, toward shore, each stroke smooth and measured. The water wrapped around me like silk, holding me steady. The reef was behind me now, but I could still feel its rhythm echoing in my chest. Small waves lapped against my arms as I moved, their sound soft and familiar. The surface shimmered with scattered light, as if the sea was still trying to speak in flickers and glints, telling me not to forget. I reached the shallows where the sand turned gold beneath my feet. Seaweed swayed in thin strands, dancing in the tide. My shadow stretched below me, elongated and rippling, as if the ocean still held part of me in its grasp. I stood slowly, water dripping from my gear, heart still quiet. The beach was empty, peaceful. Only the wind moved, brushing against the dunes and whispering through the grasses like a lullaby I half remembered. Turning back, I looked once more at the sea. The waves rolled gently, steady and patient. I dipped my fingers into the tide, letting it touch my skin one last time. A soft thank you returned. The ocean never asked, only gave. I walked slowly up the sand, each step sinking slightly, warm grains clinging to my heels. Behind me, the sea whispered farewell not loudly, but with the hush of something ancient and kind. I didn't look back again. I didn't need to. At the edge of the dunes, I sat and removed my fins, laying them beside me like folded wings. The air was rich with salt and sunlight. My body was tired, but not in a heavy way, more like a quiet exhale after a long, gentle song. I closed my eyes and let the memories drift back. The coral, the shadows, the flicker of fish, and the soft pulse of reef life. Each moment moved slowly through my mind, like bubbles rising, each one holding a part of the stillness. The world around me returned, but softly birds called in the distance. Leaves rustled gently. I listened, not comparing, not choosing, just noticing. The ocean had taught me that to be still, to see, to let things come and go. I brushed sand from my hands and stood. The sea was behind me now, yet somehow still within me. My footsteps left prints in the sand, already fading. The tide would return to smooth them away, as it always did, patient, faithful, calm. I made my way back up the path through tall grass and sun-warmed stone. Each breath I took felt deeper, quieter. I was still wrapped in the ocean's rhythm, carrying it with me like a soft tide inside my chest. The breeze touched my skin gently, as if the sky had its own version of water. I paused at the top of the hill, turning one last time to see the horizon. The sea stretched out endlessly, holding stories I had only just begun to hear. Far out, a single wave curled and fell, barely audible from where I stood. That sound, a soft crash, followed by calm, was all I needed to remember. Not the image, not the depth, but the feeling, the weightlessness of quiet. The day moved forward, slow and golden. I walked home with sand between my toes, salt on my skin, and peace in my bones. The sea had given me more than a dive. It had given me stillness. It had taught me how to listen. That night, as I lay in bed, I closed my eyes and saw blue. I felt the coral beneath me, the hush around me, the gentle rise of breath in my chest, and I slept deeply, as if cradled by the ocean itself beneath the coral sky. The wind over Seagrass Bay, Each evening, just before sunset, Theo walked the winding path down to Seagrass Bay. His boots were worn smooth from years of sand, his coat always smelling faintly of salt and wind. The sea never greeted him with noise, just the soft hush of waves and the long grass rustling like a memory being stirred. The water shimmered in soft gold and powdery blue, reflecting the sky's gentle descent into twilight. Theo always paused at the same spot beside a driftwood log, its surface bleached silver by sun and time. He would sit there in silence, letting the rhythm of the tide settle deep into his chest. Some nights the wind carried laughter from a distant cottage. Other nights just the low hush of waves and the rustle of reeds. Theo liked both. He never expected the same song twice. The sea had 100 voices, all of them gentle, none in a hurry. He poured tea from a dented old thermos, steam rising into the cool air. Holding the cup with both hands, he let the warmth seep into his fingers. It was part of the ritual. The sitting, the sipping, the listening. As the tide crept closer, the world slowed with it, calm settling over everything. Theo didn't always speak, but when he did, it was quiet, just a name, a date, a place, and the wind would take it, tugging it gently toward the sea. He imagined it drifting through the waves, sinking into memory, where it could rest undisturbed. Tonight, the tide was low, and the air carried the scent of wet stone and sea lavender. Theo watched gulls drift just above the shoreline, their wings barely moving. Everything seemed balanced wind, water silencer stitched together by time. He took a small shell from his pocket, pale and ridged, worn smooth by years at sea. He held it in his palm, then placed it beside him on the log. It wasn't a gift or an offering, just a memory made solid. He let it sit in the open, touched by wind. As dusk deepened, Theo lit a small lantern. Its glow spilled softly across the sand, casting shadows that flickered like old film. He remembered how ships used to look at night, small dots of fire on endless dark. He hadn't forgotten that feeling. Once, long ago, he had sailed for weeks without seeing land. Back then, the stars felt closer than the shore. Now, he found comfort in the bay's curves, in knowing the shape of every dune, every tide-worn path. Stillness suited him now. A breeze stirred his hair and slipped beneath his collar. Theo smiled faintly, recognizing its direction. "North wind tonight," he murmured. That meant colder air, clearer skies. Maybe a full moon. Maybe the kind of quiet dreams are made of. Theo stood and walked slowly along the water's edge, boots leaving soft impressions in the wet sand. The tide reached for his feet, curling in and slipping back as if trying to remember him. He let it, walking in rhythm with the sea's breath. Bits of driftwood and seaweed lined the shore, scattered like forgotten thoughts. He nudged a piece of coral with his toe, then bent to pick it up smooth, pink, shaped like a crooked star. He placed it in his coat pocket without a word. Out near the rocks, he saw an old buoy rocking gently in place. It creaked with every sway, like a voice trying to speak in the wind. He used to check that buoy every morning in younger days, back when mornings were louder, faster. He remembered storms too, how the waves turned dark and wild, how the wind screamed against the sails, but he didn't fear them now. Memory softened the sharp edges. Even the harshest weather had become part of the same quiet rhythm. The lantern's glow followed him as he walked a warm flicker against the blue shadows of evening. The stars had begun to show, tiny lights scattered across the sky. Theo looked up and nodded to them, as if greeting familiar faces. He returned to the driftwood log and sat again, the sky now darker, painted in soft indigo. Crickets chirped from the grasses behind him, and the tide whispered closer. Theo wrapped his coat tighter, not from cold, but from comfort. From his coat pocket he pulled out a small folded map, edges, worn lines fading. It wasn't for directions anymore. It was a reminder of places once traveled, names once spoken. He unfolded it gently and ran his fingers across the paper. There was a small tear near the southern edge. He remembered how it happened. A gust of wind had taken the map mid-sail, and it caught on a compass needle. They'd laughed about it then. Now the tear felt like part of the story. He folded the map again and placed it back in his pocket. The sea was darker now, but no less familiar. It breathed in slow waves, curling softly along the shore. Theo leaned back against the log and closed his eyes, listening closely. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang a single tone, soft and far off. It could have been from a buoy, or just memory echoing back. Theo smiled at the sound, real or not. It was enough to know it had once been part of his life. The stars multiplied overhead, each one steady and quiet, like distant companions watching from above. Theo traced constellations in his mind, Orion, the sailor's anchor, always pointing him home, even when he was far from shore. A memory surface, sailing under a moonless sky, trusting only the stars, his hands on the wheel, the wind in full song. He remembered the calm after the wind died, the sails loose and the water still, like the ocean had fallen asleep. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the scent of salt and seaweed, old wood and wind. There was a peace to this place that couldn't be named. It asked nothing from him, only that he sit and breathe and remember. His tea had gone cold, but he didn't mind. He poured the last of it onto the sand, beside him a small offering. For the tide, he said softly. The steam rose briefly, then vanished into the night, like everything eventually does. The waves reached just a little higher now, slipping over his boots. He didn't move, he let them. The ocean wasn't taking it, was touching, just checking in, just reminding him he belonged to it, still and always. Theo leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The night was full now, the sea a sheet of shifting black velvet. Every now and then the moonlight broke through clouds, lighting the water in silver threads that swayed and vanished. He thought of the people he'd sailed with, voices carried on wind, laughter over open decks, stories swapped under the stars. Many were gone now, returned to the sea, or scattered across distant ports, but here their echoes still lingered. The lantern beside him flickered in the breeze. He adjusted the glass gently, the way one might tuck in an old friend for sleep. Its glow held steady, casting a warm halo around his boots and the shell he'd left earlier on the log. Behind him the dunes rose like sleeping giants, their shapes soft in the starlight. In the grasses a heron stirred, then settled again. Everything was slow, deliberate, like the bay itself was caught in a quiet breath. Theo stood once more, stretching slowly. His joints ached, but not in complaint, just in memory. He walked a few steps toward the water and let the tide touch his soles again. Still here, he whispered, and still listening. He watched the moon rise higher, its reflection dancing gently across the waves. It reminded him of lanterns swaying from shipmasts, guiding the way through dark waters. Even now, it felt like it was showing him home, though he was already there. The sea was quieter now, each wave smaller, softer, like a conversation winding down. Theo stepped back from the tide and returned to his spot beside the lantern. The log was cool beneath him, the air calm and still. From his pocket he pulled a small, tattered notebook. Its pages curled at the corners, smudged with salt and age. He flipped it open to a blank page and began to write not in sentences, but fragments, names, winds, dreams, whatever surfaced. The act of writing was slow, like stitching together fading stars. He didn't rush, he never had to finish the page. The words weren't for others. They were just pieces of thought he didn't want to carry home in silence. When he finished, he closed the notebook and held it in his hands for a while, feeling the weight of it. It wasn't heavy, but it was full of years, places, and the quiet he'd gathered like seashells. He tucked it away again, carefully. The lantern's flame wavered gently, casting thin shadows across the sand. Theo watched the flame with quiet focus. It reminded him of distant lighthouses, blinking slowly across open waters, small steady signals in vast, uncertain dark. A breeze picked up again, cooler now, brushing through the reeds with a soft whisper. Theo listened, not to words, but to feeling. The wind had a language of its own, more suggestion than sound, more presence than message. He stood and walked along the shore once more, letting the tide swirl around his ankles. In the moonlight, the water glowed faintly, filled with dancing flecks of light. Bioluminescence, he remembered, little sparks in the sea. As he moved, those tiny lights trailed behind him like a glowing footprint, fading as fast as they formed. He smiled. Some beauty lasted only seconds, but those seconds could fill a person for years if they were paying attention. Returning to the log, he picked up the shell he'd placed earlier. It was cool to the touch, humming faintly with the night's quiet. He placed it in his pocket alongside the others, a growing collection of stillness and stories. The stars above seemed brighter now, as if they had crept closer while he wasn't looking. Theo leaned back, gazing upward, his breath slow and even. Out here, time didn't rush it, stretched gently, like the tide reaching for shore. He remembered a night just like this, decades ago. Younger hands, louder laughter, sails full. He had stood at the bow, salt on his lips, an endless sky ahead. Now the sky was still endless, but quieter, more forgiving. The sea, he thought, had a way of teaching without speaking. It taught patience, surrender, and how to let go. Each wave was a reminder. Rise, fall, return, again and again. He let that thought settle in, like sand in calm water. Behind him, the dunes shifted with the wind. The reeds swayed like they were breathing. Even the stillness here had movement, gentle, deliberate. Nothing tried to be more than it was. And maybe that was the lesson he'd come to learn. Theo took one last look at the dark horizon. The moon, now high, casting a path across the water. He stood, brushed the sand from his coat, and picked up the lantern. The tide was turning again. It was time to walk home. His footsteps were soft against the damp sand, fading quickly behind him. The lantern's glow swung gently at his side, casting long shadows across the beach. Each step felt like a goodbye, not sad, just part of the evening's rhythm. As he reached the path leading back through the dunes, he paused and turned for one last glance. The bay lay quiet, brushed with silver light, waves whispering to the shore like lullabies. He smiled a silent thank you. The grasses swayed beside him as he climbed the slope, their rustling a soft chorus. Behind him the sea carried on, unchanged and unhurried. Ahead the cottage light glowed warm through the trees, his anchor in the quiet night. He reached the porch, set the lantern down, and sat on the steps. The wind had followed him, now softer, curling round him like a shawl. He leaned back, eyes on the stars once more, letting his thoughts drift like ships. Inside, the kettle would soon boil. The walls would be filled with old books and older maps. But for now, Theo sat in silence, the sea behind him, the night around him, listening, remembering, and feeling completely at peace. The stars above blinked slowly, steady companions in the hush. Theo breathed in deeply salt, pine, cool air. Every scent belonged here, woven into the land like old rope into dock wood. He let the stillness soak through his skin. From somewhere down the coast, an owl called once, then again its voice echoed softly across the bay. Theo smiled. Even the wild things respected the quiet here, choosing not to shout, but simply announce their presence and move on. He picked up the lantern again and stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The wooden floor creaked in familiar tones. Everything in the cottage felt like memory worn, warm, and honest. No need for more than that. The kettle hissed gently on the stove, the sound soft as the sea's hush. Theo dropped a few dried leaves into his mug, watching them unfurl like tiny sails. The tea would be strong and earthy, just like the wind that carried it. He sat near the window, steaming mug in hand, and looked back toward the dark bay. He couldn't see it any more, but he felt it like a slow breath just beyond the glass, still out there, still holding him, still listening. The tea warmed his hands, the mug fitting just right between his fingers. He took slow sips, each one steadying his breath. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows, not knocking, just reminding him it was still there. He lit a single candle on the table, its flame soft and flickering. Shadows danced along the wooden walls, moving like the sea had followed him inside. He liked that thought, the ocean keeping him company, even in sleep. Theo opened the notebook again and wrote a single line. "The tide knows what I've forgotten." He smiled as he closed it. That was enough for tonight. No more stories needed to be told. The rest could wait for another evening. He rose, stretching slowly, joints murmuring with age. The bed was already turned down, the sheets cool, the pillows soft. He moved toward it with the ease of someone who had long since learned how to rest without guilt. As he lay down, the window cracked slightly open. The wind flowed in, gentle and cool. The sound of waves returned soft, rhythmic, close. He closed his eyes, the sea still moving in his mind, pulling him calmly into sleep. The candle's flame flickered low, its light tracing a warm arc on the ceiling. Outside, the tide shifted again, slowly pulling back from the shore. The bay breathed its quiet rhythm, unchanged, eternal, just as it had the night before. In his sleep, Theo stirred once, then settled. His breath matched the pulse of the waves, rising and falling in perfect time. There were no dreams, just stillness, a kind of peace that went deeper than words or memory. The wind curled gently through the window, carrying with it the scent of sea salt and distant pine. It moved through the room like a story unfinished, but complete in its telling. It touched his cheek, then vanished into shadow. Outside, the stars turned slowly across the sky, drifting westward. A shooting star crossed the horizon, silent and brief. The lighthouse far down the coast blinked twice, steady and slow, keeping time in the dark. The lantern on the porch flickered out as the oil ran low. Its light faded without ceremony, leaving only the glow of moonlight on the dune grass. Everything was still, as if the whole world had exhaled at once and gone quiet. The sea, now full of night, whispered against the shore. The waves left trails of foam that glowed faintly in the starlight, like messages scrawled in light. They faded, but not without leaving something behind, some feeling, some knowing. In the cottage, the old floorboards didn't creak. The kettle was quiet. The books remained untouched, resting like memories on a shelf. Only the wind moved, slow and careful, turning each curtain into a soft breath. Theo's chest rose and fell in time with the silence. No clock ticked. No alarm waited. The night held him gently, like the tide holding a shell without clinging, without pressure. Just presence, quiet and sure. The last cloud drifted past the moon, revealing the bay in full silver light. The dunes shimmered. The reeds bent slightly. The tide rolled in once more, as it always did, soft as a sigh. The sea was still listening. And in the quiet cottage above Seagrass Bay, with salt in the air and peace in his breath, Theo slept. The wind moved on, the stars wheeled overhead, and the ocean whispered stories to the shore slow, endless, and calm. The lighthouse keeper's light. The sun dipped low beyond the horizon, painting the sea in hues of amber and blue. On a rocky island just beyond the curve of the coast, the lighthouse stood tall, silent, and steady. Its windows caught the last of the light, holding on to it just a little longer. Inside, Thomas moved slowly through the lantern room. His hands were careful, practiced, respectful. Lighting the beacon wasn't just duty, it was ritual. Each evening he polished the lens, checked the fuel, and waited for dusk to take hold. The wind pressed gently against the thick glass, whispering from the sea. Thomas paused, listening. He never rushed this part. He swore the wind spoke to him, sometimes not with words, but with memories. It knew him, and he knew it. The flame caught with a soft breath of light, and the lens began to turn. The beam swept across the water slow, steady, patient. A signal, a promise, a comfort for anyone still at sea. Thomas stood for a moment, watching it make its first full circle. He stepped outside onto the narrow balcony, coat flapping gently in the breeze. Below, waves touched the base of the cliffs, rhythmic and soft. The night was coming quietly, as it often did, here without drama, just peace. The sky deepened into shades of violet and grey, and stars began to pierce through, one by one. Thomas leaned on the railing, mug of warm tea in hand, the ceramic smooth from years of use. He watched the light sweep over the sea, steady and calm. Each rotation was like a breath one that reached far beyond the island. It reminded him that even in stillness he served a purpose. Somewhere, perhaps, a ship's captain would glance toward his light and feel just a little less alone. He returned inside, the thick door closing behind him with a gentle thud. The lighthouse's stone walls held the day's warmth. He climbed down the spiral stairs, boots echoing softly, and entered the keeper's quarters below. Maps lined the walls, old and weathered, their corners curling like dry leaves. He traced his finger along one, following the coast he'd once sailed in younger years. The names felt like songs now half remembered, still beautiful. A small logbook lay open on the desk. He jotted the date, wind direction, and sea conditions. Routine, yes, but sacred in its way. These pages weren't just records. They were the rhythm of his days, marked in tide and time. The kettle on the small stove let out a soft hiss, and Thomas poured a second cup of tea. Outside, the sea brushed against the rocks in slow, steady waves. He sipped in silence, the warmth grounding him, the quiet wrapping around his shoulders. He walked over to the bookshelf, filled with sea journals, old novels, and weathered notebooks. Some he'd read dozens of times. Others he kept for the comfort of their presence alone. He chose one, thumbed through its pages, and smiled softly. The lighthouse creaked gently, settling into night. It wasn't eerie, it was familiar, like a ship sighing at anchor. Thomas had grown used to the language of this place, the groan of beams, the whisper of wind, the low hum of the beacon above. He lit a lamp near the window and sat in his worn armchair, the same chair he'd had since arriving. Its fabric had faded, its arms smoothed by years of rest. He looked out at the ocean, at the slow arc of the light moving across the water. Sometimes he thought of the people who once lived here, keepers, long before him. Their routines, their thoughts. He wondered if they too found comfort in the sound of distant waves, in tea and quiet, in being the last light before open sea. Thomas stood and placed a hand on the wall beside him. The stone was cool and solid. It had weathered storms, winds, and years. So had he. There was a quiet kinship between them two sentinels, holding steady as the world shifted around them. The logs crackled softly in the small stove, casting flickering light across the floor. He stirred the coals gently, not out of need, but for the comfort of the motion. The glow reminded him of lanterns in ship cabins long ago. Outside, the sea called in low tones. The tide was beginning to change, and he could hear it in the pool of water on stone. It was a language he'd learned over time, how to hear the difference between a rising tide and a restless one. He made one last round of the tower, climbing the spiral stairs slowly. The beam turned faithfully, casting long arcs of light across the dark water. Thomas checked the oil, the glass, and the flame, all steady, all strong. He stood at the top for a while, listening to the quiet hum of the lens and the wind around the tower. No one else was near, no ships tonight, but still the light turned, just in case someone needed it, just in case someone was watching. Back on the balcony, Thomas leaned on the rail, staring into the night. The sea stretched out like a dark quilt, stitched with moonlight. The stars above blinked slowly, steady and distant, like quiet companions keeping watch with him. He thought of an old friend, a fellow sailor, long gone now. They used to sit on deck and count the stars, trading stories, sharing silence. You steer by the stars, his friend once said, but you sleep by the sound of the sea. Thomas smiled at the memory. The sea had a way of holding moments like that, never loudly, just patiently, somewhere out there, The laughter, the footsteps, the voices of those long past still echoed, softened by time and tide. The wind picked up slightly, brushing his coat and tugging gently at the edge of his scarf. He tightened it around his neck and took a deep breath. Salt, night air, and something older, something like memory. He closed his eyes for a moment. From the tower's height he saw no ships, no distant lights, just the endless dark, moving and alive. He whispered, not loudly, just enough for the sea to hear, still watching. Then he turned and descended the stairs in calm silence. In the keeper's kitchen, the clock ticked softly. Thomas warmed his hands by the stove, the orange glow flickering across his face. The logs shifted with a gentle crack. It was the kind of quiet only found far from roads and towns. He poured a small measure of honey into his mug, stirring slowly. The tea smelled of chamomile and dried citrusa, comfort from the mainland. He didn't miss much from that world, but tea and warmth were always welcome. He sat at the table with the logbook open, tracing old entries. Some dated back years' notes about heavy fog, high winds, a single ship seen passing east. His handwriting had changed slightly, but the rhythm remained steady. He added tonight's note in careful script. Clear sky, gentle wind from the northwest. No vessels sighted. Light functioning steady. Then, beneath it, smaller, calm sea. No visitors. Peaceful. He tapped the page once, then closed the book. The flame in the lamp beside him danced gently. He watched it for a long time, letting thoughts come and go like driftwood on a tide. There was no urgency. The sea would speak if it wished. Until then, he would listen in silence. Thomas stood and moved toward the window. Outside, the ocean shimmered beneath the moon, waves brushing the island's edge with soft, steady sighs. The light above turned smoothly, sweeping over the water like a slow, gentle breath. His reflection stared back at him in the glass-lined face. Grey hair, eyes that had watched many nights fall just like this. He lifted a hand and touched the pane, not to see out, but to remind himself he was still here, still present. Behind him, the room was still. The only sounds were the faint tick of the clock and the slow shifting of firewood. No engines, no voices, no rush. The island existed in a world apart, where time didn't hurry it, simply passed. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside were folded letters, faded photos, and tiny trinkets from years long gone. Each piece told a quiet story: a dockside farewell, a ship's name, a night under foreign stars. He didn't read the letters tonight. Just touching them was enough. Their weight, their worn edges, held memory in a way words didn't have to. He closed the box gently, like returning something sacred to the care of time. Thomas placed the box back in its drawer, then stood for a moment, his hand resting on the edge. The room held stillness like a harbor holds boats safely, patiently. Outside, the sea continued its endless conversation with the shore. He walked slowly to the bedroom, lantern in hand. The hallway was narrow, the floorboards creaked softly beneath his steps. He didn't mind. The lighthouse had its own voice, one that only grew quieter when he listened more. His bed was simple, tucked beneath a small window that framed a slice of sky and sea. He placed the lantern on the nightstand and sat on the edge, removing his boots slowly. Each motion was familiar, worn into routine like the tide's return. He lay back, arms resting across his chest, eyes open to the ceiling. Faint moonlight spilled in, brushing the floor in pale ribbons. The sound of the beacon's slow turn above echoed softly through the stone, steady and sure. As he closed his eyes, he felt the rhythm of the sea beneath him, the slow rise and fall, the hush of waves on rock. The lighthouse was still, the island held in silence, and Thomas, keeper of the light, drifted gently into sleep. The night deepened, wrapping the island in a quiet blue hush. The waves curled softly around the base of the cliff, as if whispering stories too old to tell aloud. In his bed, Thomas slept, his breath rising and falling with the rhythm of the tide. The beacon turned steadily above, casting its golden eye out over the open water. No ships passed, no lights returned its gaze. Still, it kept turning faithful, patient, steady. Not for attention, but because that's what it was made to do. Clouds drifted in slowly, pulling across the stars like soft curtains. The sea darkened, but not threateningly, with the kind of peace that asks nothing. The lighthouse stood silent and tall, its light sweeping the horizon again and again. Inside, the clock ticked softly in the kitchen, and the stove's last embers glowed a deep orange. The whole house breathed in stillness. Each creak of wood or brush of wind felt like part of a lullaby only the island understood. In dreams, Thomas walked the shoreline barefoot, the sand cool and firm beneath his feet. The moon hung low, and a soft wind tugged at his sleeves. No destination, no urgency, just walking, just listening, just remembering. In the dream, sea foam traced gentle lines around his ankles, then faded. He paused to look back, his footprints already softening, claimed by the tide. The shoreline was quiet, endless. He walked on, unbothered by where it led. A distant gull cried overhead, its voice stretching into the wind. It wasn't lonely, just present like everything else in the dream. The ocean sparkled under moonlight, and the breeze held the scent of salt and memory. He stopped near a familiar rock, one he'd known for decades. It hadn't changed, still firm, still watching the sea. He sat upon it, resting his hands in his lap, and gazed out across the dark horizon. The waves murmured their welcome. In the dream, he wasn't old nor young, just as he was complete, unburdened. The sea before him didn't ask, didn't offer, it simply was. He closed his eyes and listened. The wind moved gently through his hair like an old friend returning. Back in the lighthouse, Thomas stirred slightly in his sleep. The beacon continued its slow, steady spin. The night remained whole, the sea faithful, the dream lingered, not vivid, but warm, like a song remembered only by heart. Morning neared, though the sky had not yet changed. The stars still held their places, but a subtle shift stirred the air. The sea, too, seemed to notice its surface just a little lighter, its waves a little more curious. Inside the lighthouse, the fire had gone out. The kettle sat cool, but peace lingered like mist on glass. Thomas still slept, his expression calm, his hands resting over the blanket as if holding something too gentle to wake. The wind slipped through the cracked window, carrying the first hint of dawn. It touched his cheek, soft as breath. A signal, perhaps, that another day waited, but it asked nothing of him. Just a nudge, just a whisper. Above, the light continued its rotation, casting golden arcs over the grey water. It had shone all night for no one in particular, and yet that was the point, a promise kept even in solitude, a guide even if unseen. Out at sea, a single gull glided low, wings outstretched, cutting a smooth line through the morning air. It turned once, then vanished behind the cliffs. The island held still, as if pausing to savor the last hush of night. The sky lightened by degrees lavender, then pale rose. The stars faded, not vanished, just resting. The sea mirrored the change, trading silver black for soft pearl. The wind held its breath, as though honoring the slow arrival of day. Thomas stirred at last, eyelids fluttering open. For a moment he simply listened. The turning of the beacon above, the hush of waves below, and the faint cry of morning gulls, all familiar, all exactly as it should be. He sat up, feet meeting the cold wooden floor. The day did not rush him. He moved with the rhythm of a man used to quiet, used to purpose, used to carrying out each motion with calm intention. This was his first ritual, rising gently. He folded the blanket at the foot of the bed, then stepped to the window. Outside, the horizon yawned wide and glowing. A thin mist drifted low across the waves. The sea looked like it was dreaming, even in waking light. The beacon's beam dimmed, its glow yielding to the sun. Thomas looked up at the tower with quiet respect. Another night done, another light kept. He touched the wall beside him gently. "Good work," he whispered. He climbed the stairs slowly, each step echoing through the tower. The morning air inside was cool and dry, tinged with the faint scent of oil and old stone. At the top, he opened the windowed hatch and let in the light of day. The beacon's flame had shrunk to a quiet flicker. He turned the dial to ease it out, watching it go with care. No sudden extinguishing, just a calm goodbye. The lens stopped its rotation, the room still and sunlit once more. Outside, the sea sparkled, alive with gentle movement. A breeze lifted across the water, catching the edges of the island and brushing past his shoulders like a greeting. He stood there a long time, saying nothing at all. Back downstairs, he placed a kettle on the stove and filled his mug with warm water, letting a fresh tea bag steep. The scent of herbs rose with the steam. A new day had begun, but it arrived like a friend, not a task. He sat by the window once more, journal in hand. He wrote, "Light kept, sea calm, no ships sighted, morning clear," then added beneath it, "Still listening, still grateful." He closed the book, smiled faintly, and watched the tide return. The tide eased in quietly, smoothing the shore with a soft rush. Foam traced lines in the sand, then disappeared like thoughts forgotten on purpose. The island breathed with the rhythm of the scene, ever rushed, never still. Thomas stepped outside, boots crunching lightly on the path. The gulls circled overhead, and sunlight warmed the stone walls of the lighthouse. The light was off now, but its presence remained, like a song after the music ends. He stood facing the horizon, one hand resting against the tower. The wind brushed through his hair, playful and kind. He let his eyes rest on the wide-open cynoships. No sails, just promise. And that was enough. He turned toward the cottage, lantern in one hand, journal in the other. The lighthouse stood behind him, tall and certain. Another night behind him, another waiting ahead. But for now, the day was his to keep. And so the keeper walked back along the quiet path as the sea whispered and the sky opened wide. Behind him, the lighthouse waited silent, watchful, ready to shine again when called. The light was his to tend. The night the wind remembered. The night was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels full, not empty. A gentle wind brushed along the hills as a lone traveler followed a path lit only by stars. They didn't know where it led, only that it asked nothing but stillness. Ahead, lantern light shimmered from a village tucked into a valley. Chimneys exhaled faint wisps of smoke, and windows glowed with the comfort of sleep. The traveler paused, hearing laughter carried on the breeze, familiar though no faces appeared. A single street lamp flickered as the traveler passed beneath it, boots soft on stone. They smelled bread, soil, and the last of the day's sunlight on stone walls. The village, it seemed, remembered things without needing to speak them aloud. The road turned gently, rising toward a low hill where wildflowers slept in the grass. At the top, the traveler saw the ocean glimmering below silver and calm, stretching far beyond the edge of knowing. With a breath, they stepped off the hill's edge onto a new trail, this one sandy and warm. The wind carried the scent of salt and coral. Somewhere far below, fish moved through moonlit water, and a reef pulsed in slow, living silence. Though feet remained on land, the traveller's thoughts drifted under the surface. Bubbles rose in memory. Shadows of manta rays and sunken ships swam in the edges of their mind. The sea was not quiet, simply spoke in slower time. They passed a tide pool glowing faintly with bioluminescence. Each tiny flicker a whisper from another story, one they half remembered. A name surfaced Theo perhaps, or maybe just a feeling too gentle to be named. The path narrowed again, lifting from the sand to stone steps wrapped around a cliff. Up and up, until the sea was far below. The wind turned cooler, more watchful. In the distance, a light spun slowly in circles steady, eternal. At the top, a lighthouse stood. Its windows glowed gold, and its beams swept calmly over the waves. The traveler stepped inside. A journal lay open on a desk, for words were scrawled on the page. Still listening, still here. They left the journal untouched, only adding a shell to the windowsill before continuing on. The beacon turned behind them, casting one last arc of light across the path ahead. The wind, again, shifted this time, softer. The land sloped gently down to a quiet bay, lined with reeds and driftwood. Here, even the waves seemed hesitant to speak. The traveler sat beside a bleached log and let their fingers run through the cool sand. A thermos sat near the log. Still warm, they poured a cup, and the steam rose into the night like the beginning of a thought. Above, the stars began to shift. The bay had no clock, but it knew when to rest. A notebook rested under a stone. The traveler opened it gently. Inside, fragments, drawings, weather patterns. A familiar hand. No signature, only a final page that read, "Everything returns here eventually, even light." They left the notebook and stood again. The tide crept close, reaching toward their boots, then pulling back. The water was not asking it, was greeting, remembering. The wind lifted, brushing hair from their face like an old friend. As they walked the curve of the bay, a heron passed overhead in silence. The moon glowed higher now, and the water shimmered with calm. The world had grown weightless, like everything was holding its breath just a little. The path narrowed once more, winding between dune grass and rock. Then, slowly, it returned to where it began, at the edge of the village, where all lights were now out and even the windows had closed their eyes. The travelers stopped beneath the same street lamp. It no longer flickered. The stone beneath their feet was warm, as if it had been waiting. They looked back not with longing, but with thanks. Every step had carried memory. They sat beside the path and pulled their coat tighter. The breeze wrapped around them gently, like a story being told one last time. The stars above spun slowly. The sea hummed softly in the distance. No one appeared, no voice called, but nothing felt missing. The world, just as it was, had offered its story, one told in tide, wind, light, and rest. One the traveler hadn't needed to understandly receive. They closed their eyes, the wind quieted, the sea breathed, and the night, the whole vast, patient night, held them there in perfect stillness, until even thought gave way to sleep.